students. Today we're going to finish up World War I with some effects of World War I. Please make sure that you're taking notes as you go along. I kind of stagger these and organize these into our traditional um, types of effects: political, social, economic, as a way to try and link some of these things together. But overall, we want to consider that World War I and its aftermath is going to really set us up for World War II. It's going to set up the geopolitical structure in Europe, and it has far-reaching consequences all around the world. So this is just the last slide from the previous PowerPoint. Other events of 1918-ish, 11/11 a.m., the armistice is signed, ending official fighting in World War I, and that's going to lead to eventually the Treaty of Versailles being signed, which will take us into the Paris Peace Conference. During this time, this is where we see Germany forced to swallow the bitter pill that is the war guilt clause. I'll post some excerpts from the Paris Peace Conference and from this particular treaty in order to kind of see that. Effects of World War I. So immediate effects, Germany has to take the blame. That's the war guilt clause. Germany is going to have to dramatically reduce its military, which is during a time where militarism is a big deal and tied to nationalism. That's a kind of a kick in the pants. Germany is also forced to give up some land to Italy and France, including, hey, Alsace and Lorraine. They make an appearance again. And then Germany is forced to pay for the war. And this one is really going to be the economic driver of what happens in Europe. It's going to inadvertently lead to the Great Depression in Europe, because while we study the Great Depression here in the United States, we look at it as a U.S. problem. This is a worldwide depression that actually starts a little bit earlier in Europe. Being forced to pay the war reparations to Great Britain, to France, is really a problem for them. Really, when it comes down to the Paris Peace Conference, Woodrow Wilson and the United States is looking to establish his 14 points. He's looking to establish the League of Nations. He's looking to make the world a more globalized place. And so these countries are meant to link together and work together and have this collective defense, which is a little bit odd in that it goes back to those early days of conservatism following the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. That's the driving force behind the United States and what they want out of this. That is not in line with what the rest of Europe wants. It's too soon. Too soon. The rest of Europe is looking at this as this is the most destructive thing that has ever happened in world history, and somebody's to blame, and we need to make them pay for it. France especially, their driving motivation, George Clemenceau, his driving motivation is to make France pay. He actually runs on a ticket when he's elected prime minister of it's Germany's fault, basically. David Lloyd George also wants to blame Germany. He runs, when he becomes prime minister after Herbert Henry Asquith, does the same exact thing, runs on it is Germany's fault, we will make Germany pay. We'll talk about some of Britain's other motivations as well. France is concerned. Their overall goal is to make sure that Germany can never invade and make them look feeble again and cause the destruction that they cause in France. France is the most destroyed country in World War I because that's the Western Front stalemate that had been going on, and it completely destroys the French landscape and structures there. So they are incredibly nervous about this, and so one of their main concerns, in addition to punishing Germany, is just to make sure that their safety is cared for. And in their minds, a League of Nations isn't going to get that done. If Germany is a part of that, it's not going to be safe for France. So political effects, monarchies crumble. Russia, the Tsar is gone. Germany, the Kaiser is gone. The Ottoman Empire is completely disbanded. Austria-Hungary is no longer an empire. So these monarchical empires are going to disappear completely. And we're going to see the rise of republics. And I know I'm skipping down, but the rise of republics, including the Weimar Republic in Germany, which is kind of hamstrung from the very beginning. The German people really don't have a lot of faith in this republic, in part because it's forced on them. And you can kind of understand where they're coming from. You're going to change your government. You're going to do this because we say so. At the same time that you're getting basically spit on by these other countries who are saying, you need to shoulder the blame for this, where Germany's like, whoa, 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 what about Franz Ferdinand? What about Serbia? What about Austria-Hungary? But that doesn't really fly for some of the forces like France and Britain. We see the spread of socialism across Europe. The biggest example of this is going to be the Bolsheviks and civil war in Russia, but Germany goes through a period where the Social Democratic Party, the SDP, that we talked about last chapter, that really begins to gain power. And actually, it's really touch and go in Germany as to whether there's going to be some form of radical revolution driven by these socialists. But the Republic is able to kind of hold power and hold on as long as possible. In Russia, however, that does not happen. Russia goes from, and we'll talk about this later, but Russia goes from this Bolshevik revolution to just basically a variety of civil wars and battles between the white nationalist forces and the red Bolshevik forces. Um, the Reds are able to withstand the onslaught from the Nationalists because they're not super organized. They want different things, whereas the Bolsheviks want one thing. They're looking for the spread of Marxism and communism, and that happens through these Soviets, and we'll get into that more later. Colonies. The colonies go into the peace conference, and there are like 39 different countries represented here. They go into this peace conference thinking we're going to get sovereignty. There's going to be individual sovereignty for all these different nations. That's a big pushing point for Woodrow Wilson. The idea that this war is caused by these larger empires keeping control over groups of people, large groups of people who do not want to be controlled. The elements of nationalism are too strong. And so for Woodrow Wilson, he's trying to eliminate that. The problem is Great Britain doesn't want to. Remember, Great Britain is the largest empire in the world, has all of these territorial holdings. And so they say, no, we're not going to ratify that one. And that kind of puts a dent in the 14 points that Wilson brings up. These colonies look at this and say, we were promised this, we fought next to you, like we talked about the Anzac forces, but other forces, they're fighting all over the world for their empire, and that yet they don't get self-determination out of this. They don't get the ability to determine what their government is going to be and be in charge of their own government. And so we see some rebellions, especially India is going to be the big one that you see. The United States has established itself as a world power, thanks to coming in and helping to end the war, even though more later historians have looked at this and said, what exactly was the shifting the balance of power thanks to the United States? But they absolutely play a role in all of this. And because there's no fighting on U.S. soil, that kind of leaves them standing as, oh, hey, we're the only ones that didn't get completely destroyed by all of this. We also see, kind of in a broader sense, more government involvement. During the wartime, the economies basically had to be controlled. There had to be rations. There had to be food. There were food shortages. There were price, I don't want to say gouging. There were price floors and price ceilings that are put into place. And especially in terms of bigger businesses, these countries will do this. It had to happen to keep the war machine turning, to make sure that supplies were getting where they needed to, munitions, food, etc. And so that's going to stick around after the war ends. The government is going to, the governments of these different countries are going to look at this and say, yeah, we can get involved in these kinds of things. It's not completely alien for us to do so. Here you see post-World War I Middle East. I just wanted to draw your attention there. The Middle East this is the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, is not going to be self-determined. And you see Britain and France being in there. Turkey's really the only one with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, as we saw yesterday. Here's another map to show the shifting transition politically. We have the Triple Entente and the Central Powers on the left side. And then as you look on the right side, you see what Europe is going to look like after the peace conference is over. And so we see the establishment of different nations like Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, not Austria-Hungary any longer. Yugoslavia, that's that pan-Slavism, that nationalist movement in the Balkans. Italy gains a little bit of land. Switzerland's still there. We see all these different. Poland gets established from Russia because, again, Russia's in the throes of civil war. All of that's going on. Effects economically, Germany's economy is destroyed. Europe will also slow down. They really struggle to figure out post-war economics. So while the United States experiences a boom in the roaring 20s, Europe does not feel that. Europe really kind of kicks off the Great Depression. Those war reparations that Germany has to pay lead to extreme inflation. And so you see that image over there on the right. That's an actual image of a German going to the store to purchase some food. The value of the Deutschmark becomes so devalued because the solution is just print more money. That is going to lead to inflation. The U.S. establishes itself as an economic power, becomes the creditor for the world, basically, dishing out loans left and right to European countries to try and get them back on their feet. That drives the prestige of U.S. economics, and it also drives money into the U.S. economy. Larger working classes established. This is a product of production during wartime. Everybody was involved in production. The unemployment rate hit basically zero in Europe during this time period because you had to mobilize everybody possible for the war effort. We'll get into women, but the women are absolutely a part of that movement as well. Middle class struggles, especially your upper middle class who makes money from investments. Kind of I don't want to say the bourgeoisie, but that's kind of how we've been still referring to that group. Anybody who doesn't have actual jobs, physical jobs, if you're making money from small businesses and things like that, you're in some trouble. The larger business owners are going to come out on top. So we do see some additional economic disparity between the top and everybody else. Also, production of technology. We go from carrier pigeons to the production of radios, to the production of weaponry that is far beyond anything ever before. Automobile boom really comes out of this as well. Social. Women's roles are going to increase. Labor only during the war. After the war is over, the men come home and it's like, okay, ladies, go back to doing your housewife thing. And the women are kind of like, no, we deserve equal rights, equal pay, not equal pay, but we deserve the opportunities, equal opportunities. And that's eventually going to lead to the ideas of women's suffrage. Well, if the men aren't going to be able to kind of get this done for us, we need to get involved. Stylistically, you can look at that picture. I did not have the time to verify that picture. It was put together by somebody else, but it gives you a basic idea. We go from kind of this real demure look to something that's much more practical. Shorter dresses, shorter haircuts, different style hats, those kinds of things. We see the rise of paramilitary groups in Germany especially who say, we're just not going to listen to this. We're going to keep the fight going, and that's going to be a big part of how the Nazi movement gets going after World War I. Then we have the influenza, the Spanish flu of 1918 that's worldwide, and the Armenian genocide, in which millions of Armenians in Turkey are killed. You can see that here in this picture. It just gives you an idea of where these atrocities took place. And there's still some Armenian genocide deniers, just like there are still some Holocaust deniers. Part of that is because Turkey is a close ally of the U.S. The U.S. has defense there along the Black Sea, closer to Europe, and the U.S. doesn't really push the issue because it greatly offends Turkey to refer to it as an Armenian genocide. So things that are happening there during that time period are still affecting geopolitics today. Death rate of the Spanish flu, you can see the areas hardest hit as you look across Europe there, but all over the world. This is a true global disease. This is a pandemic. It is all over the world. And you can see Asia. Asia is typically hardest hit when these things happen. A lot of these pandemics will actually start in Asia, as we've seen in the past. Effects of World War II. So the basic idea is H.G. Wells says that this is the war to end all wars, and Woodrow Wilson, in a moment of being Michael Scott, basically popularizes that quote. And it's simply not the case. The war to end all wars is actually the war to begin a second world war. Not necessarily the fighting part of it, but the geopolitical structure that occurs afterwards and the feelings of resentment that still linger in Germany afterwards. Germany is extremely proud people, and for them to be told you're forced to accept this guilt, that's something that they simply can't grasp. And so that's something that's going to be these deep-seated resentment that's going to exist is going to be part of the reason that Germany kind of keeps going and says, well, we got to do what Germans do. We're a proud people, and that's where we see the rise of the Nazis as well. We'll get into that a little bit later, but first, we're going to hit the Russian Revolution coming up next. Hope you all have a great day, and if you have any questions, please let me know.